Hello and welcome. I'm Carolyn Grimminger with the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our program's mission is to nourish the mind and spirit and serve social justice. Our forums occur on most Sundays at noon and are free and open to the public. We encourage you to attend. Our church is physically located at 4700 Grover Avenue in Austin, Texas. For more information about our Public Affairs Forum, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. Today our speaker is Reverend Diana Dworin. She's a graduate of the Episcopal Theological Seminary of the Southwest, and she worked for more than 20 years as a journalist, daily newspaper reporter, and editor before becoming an interfaith chaplain. Her pastoral care experiences also include work at Austin area trauma hospitals and Dell Children's Medical Center. Welcome, Reverend Dworin.
Hi, good afternoon. In the interest of full disclosure, I had a little foot race this morning. So if I am alternatively blissed out or a little bit out there, I want to blame it on that. So thank you for having me here today. I am wondering if you all might be open to this. Would you all be open to coming closer? If you don't want to, that is okay, but there's a lot of little kind of cold spots that maybe we could warm up with somebody so that we can begin. I want to tell you one of the things that I was struck by right away was the sign behind me that talks about building beloved community. I am in partnership with that in the work that I do at Hospice Austin's Christopher House. And if you'll join me, I'd like to start with a little poem by a poet I'm sure this community is familiar with. Rumi wrote a poem called Everywhere, and I'd like to begin that as a way of centering today. Everywhere, the aroma of God begins to arrive. Look at these people, not knowing their feet from head as they begin to arrive. Every soul is seeking God's soul. Every soul parched with thirst. They've all heard the voice of the quencher of thirst. Everyone tastes the love. Everyone tastes the milk. Anxious to know from where the real mother begins to arrive. Waiting in fever, wondrously, ceaselessly, when will that final union begin to arrive? Muslims and Christians and Jews, raising their hands to the sky, their chanting voices in unison begin to arrive. How happy is the one whose heart's ear hears that special voice as it begins to arrive. Clear your ears, my friend, from all impurity. A polluted ear can never hear the sound as it begins to arrive. If your eyes are marred with petty visions, wash them with tears. Your teardrops are healers as they begin to arrive. Keep silence. Don't rush to finish your poem. The finisher of the poem, the creator of the world, will begin to arrive. So I share that with you because I think that it speaks to beloved community. And I think that it also speaks to the holiness of this experience of life. So I want to say hello and thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Diana Dworin. I am the staff chaplain at Hospice Austin's Christopher House. And just out of curiosity, how many folks in this room, you can just raise your hand, have had an experience or a loved one or have visited Christopher House? Yeah, that's quite a few people. And just for my information as I begin this talk, how many folks here have had an experience with hospice? Okay, good. I sometimes, when I'm invited to parties and people ask what I do, bringing up the fact that I work in hospice care can sometimes make a room very quiet, very quick. And it is mostly not because people have a fear of anything in particular about me. They have had an experience with hospice or a loved one's death that has been so transformative or so deeply felt that it continues to be with them. I've had experiences sometimes at parties when people start talking to me with tears in their eyes, even years after their loved one has died. So I want you to know that if just having this conversation today is bubbling some of that up within you, that's normal. And if there's anything that kind of bubbles up a little too much for you, I want you to know that I'll stay after for a little bit, and I'd be happy to talk with you all. So I just want this to be a safe space for this conversation. So one of the things that I'm going to be talking about today is about hospice care. Now, to be on hospice service, a doctor has to take a look at the situation, and with some degree of surety, although nothing is ever certain in these things, the doctor has to place a prognosis of 6 months of life expectancy for someone to be eligible for hospice care. Now, I am speaking to you as someone who represents Hospice Austin. Hospice Austin has more than 300 people at any time on our hospice care service. We cover the 5-county area, including Travis, Williamson, Hayes, Bastrop, and Caldwell, I believe. I always get that 5th county wrong because I live in Austin and everything gets blurry after Williamson County for me. But one of the unique things about Hospice Austin is that we have something called an inpatient unit. And what we call our inpatient unit here in Austin is Christopher House. We have 14 rooms, and generally speaking, we have people who are just like those sitting around you. We have people from young to old. The youngest patient I've been with is only days old. The oldest person I've been with is, well, I think 104. We have people from all over the world, people from religious affiliations that cover any type of faith tradition you could imagine. Many times, though, and if you look at some of the research today in American spirituality, the Pew Institute now estimates that about 25% of the American population identify as spiritual but not religious. In this field, they're known as nuns, not N-U-N-S. I don't want to confuse that, but nun, in that they don't necessarily have an affiliation that they feel drawn to. Sometimes, oftentimes, what I'll hear from people is, well, I don't really go to church, but I'm Methodist because my grandma was Methodist. You know, it's like kind of a heritage affiliation more than an active practice. But what makes that beautiful is I get to, at Christopher House, be with some of the sickest of our patients, the ones whose care can't be managed at home anymore. Many times the patients that I serve are no longer able to talk, but their family certainly can. And their family members are some of the people in my life who I get to be with day after day. And what I do, oh good, we have a little Kleenex box. I like this as an illustration. What I do oftentimes is find out what's been helpful. And in fact, one of the questions that I often ask is, you know, what faith tradition do you have? I'll ask, is there a tradition that's been helpful to you? Because sometimes the tradition is not always helpful. And so we look at what people bring to the table. And I'll kind of go through their spiritual suitcase of sorts and pull things out and, you know, like, does this fit? No? Okay, then we don't have time for that anymore. What resources, what spiritual coping mechanisms do you have that are serving you well? And those are the things that I hone in on as in my role as being an interfaith chaplain. So I have a hard time explaining what a chaplain does. And I think that you would probably get as many answers to that question as there are chaplains out there. But I think one of the very best descriptions comes from a writer by the name of Carrie Egan. She wrote a book called On Living, which I would certainly commend to any of you all to read. She's been interviewed on NPR I know nobody in this community listens to NPR, so, so find NPR. But also, I think that she's also been interviewed by Krista Tippett and some other wonderful thinkers. She speaks about hospice chaplains like this. Hospice chaplains are holders of story. We listen to the stories that people believe have shaped their lives, and we listen to the stories people choose to tell and the meaning they make of those stories. While religion plays a central role in spiritual care for many patients, it doesn't for many others. Spiritual care, faith, and religion are not the same thing. Some chaplains might also be priests and pastors, but in their roles as chaplains, they don't preach or teach. Instead, chaplains create space, a sacred time and place in which people can look at the lives they've led and try to figure out what it all means to them. So any of you who have accompanied another person in the end-of-life journey, this is no pressure, but would anybody here be open to talking just very briefly about those experiences and some of the space that was held during that time that you did accompanying another? Anybody? And that's okay. This is a big question if nobody wants to.
I don't think my experience is typical, so maybe.
Yeah, no, go right ahead. What's your name?
My name is Sandy.
Hey, Sandy.
My experience isn't really typical. I was called home in the spring. My father was dying. They thought he had a couple of days, and when I got there, the doctors had been passing back and forth information for months and not actually doing something good. And but when I got there, we called hospice, and they were so fast and so wonderful. Okay. And in fact, the children, there are 5 daughters, decided that my father was giving off the same sort of thing as my son who suffers from anxiety. So we got him some anxiety meds, which the other doctors wouldn't do. So we had him the next day, and this is not typical, I guess, but he's so well now. He's fixed. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
So, he got terrifically better. But the woman, the people we had from Compassus, this is the name, they, from hospice, were and are very close to him. They follow him. I didn't know this. He got into an assisted living, and he took them with him, and so they're just wonderful, wonderful people. And
you know what? I really appreciate you sharing that story. I am so glad that your father is doing well now.
Thank you.
And what I am so glad is it sounds to me like that experience of coming together really helps kind of the noise of life start to drop when our mortality is thought about as end of life nears. One of the things that I find that often happens is what we see in everyday life. I'm going to give you an illustration. Soon after I started at Christopher House, I met with a woman and her husband. They were newlyweds, and they were young. And just a week ago in the hospital, before they came to Christopher House, they were married. And I came into the room to speak with my patient. And what she was doing was she had her iPad kind of propped up on her knee in bed, and she was swiping and smiling and looking at all of the proofs from her wedding the week before. And every time she'd just smile. In her other hand, she had a pain pump. And any time her pain got too intense, she would press the pain pump to get some relief. So I bring that story up because it really speaks to some of the things that we hold all together at end of life in particular. We hold pain, and we hold joy, and we hold sadness, and believe it or not, we hold laughter. We see humanity at some of its finest. One of the things that we recently celebrated at Christopher House was our 20th anniversary here in Austin. Christopher House was originally founded as an AIDS hospice. Now, as time has progressed since 20 years ago, there are many therapies now that have extended out the life for people who have HIV/AIDS. Hospice Austin was able to acquire Christopher House, and what had happened after that is the community began coming, and we were able to go ahead and serve people on hospice care. It is always an unusual day there. Unusual at the same time, because we get to see love that will blow your hair back. And we get to see kindness that is expressed. We get to see ex-spouses show up and do some of the most loving, beautiful expressions of care. We see reconciliation. We see peace. We also, though, see years and decades of family dynamics that come messy. Some of it can't really be unraveled. But what we find is that when we have an environment where the noise of life can drop away, those things that become beloved community really do have a place of nurturance and a place where love can grow. I wanted to read out one of the things that we had done. So I was a newspaper reporter at the Statesman before I went to seminary. I love that stuff. It's story. The way I came into spiritual care and chaplaincy is through story. So, of course, one of the ways that I have tried to make my job even more wonderful is I started my own newspaper for Christopher House. It's Hospice Austin's Christopher House. We call it Hatch for short. So I'm the publisher and editor and reporter of the Hatch Dispatch. And I wanted to read this because this is something that one of my favorite nurses that I work with had said, one of the life lessons that she's learned from Christopher House. Her name is Tracy. People sometimes tell me they think my job is sad, but really, that actually just tells me more about their comfort level about death than about my work. I'd say that my job here doesn't make me sad. It's actually the things that I see out in the real world that can make me sad. Here, I get to see people connected and supporting each other, and I get to witness great love on a daily basis. I get to be a part of presence, communion, love, and appreciation for what really matters. I get to see patients, families, and our staff at their very best. I wish people didn't have to be in the midst of death to see this beauty as clearly as we see it here every day. In my life, it has given me a profound sense of love. I don't mean to sugarcoat death. I hold space many times for people that are angry, for people who have had long and enduring fights with God, people who don't know who to lash out at, so they lash out at everyone. But at the same time, when we have a place and we have an ethic of healing in the many different forms that it comes, not maybe just the physical healing that everybody would want for their loved one, we really do. We do see a lot of beautiful things occur for family members and for loved ones. So I know that when the topic of hospice comes up, there are a lot of different questions. I am happy to take a few questions now, and then I've got a few other things that I'd like to offer up today. Anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
Remind me of your name again.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Do the chaplains have a code of ethics that they have to adhere to? If I I would be hesitant to call a chaplain, being a non-believer myself, so I
Oh,
would
yeah.
not want to be proselytized to. Do they have something that they say that they will agree to not do that?
Yes, any chaplain in Hospice Austin in particular, and I think any chaplain with any sense of real calling in this work, is there to hold space and is very much led by the person who they are serving. I've worked with so many folks that identify as atheist or agnostic. Those are my favorite patients. And I want to tell you why they're my favorite patients. They are oftentimes ones who can see a bigger picture of love. And many times they're not constrained by words like should. So I absolutely, one of the things that I am very clear about is I don't wear any sign of faith. I wear this cloud. I'm going to tell you a story about this. And Tomas, I'm sorry if I've already regaled you with way too many cloud stories. So I fancy myself an amateur meteorologist, but I'm like a really dorky meteorologist because all I care about is clouds and the shape of clouds. So I joined this group, and y'all are welcome to join too. It's called the Cloud Appreciation Society. It's a thing. It is like a legit thing. What I do every day at work is I'm always wearing a cloud necklace. Clouds are, of course, in the symbology of many religious traditions, but I wear this cloud because this is a cumulus mediocris. This cloud is as tall as it is wide. So when a cloud kind of stretches out long ways, that's a cloud that's just going to bring shade to the picnic. That's the cloud that you want to be friends with. When the cloud gets tall, that cloud is going to bring rain. So a cumulus mediocris is deciding what kind of cloud it's going to be. It may be either one of those, or it may just disappear. And I wear this to remind me that every single time I knock on a door for a room, to hold things open. Do not go in there with an idea of, I've got this figured out. This is a rain cloud. Well, no, you don't. Having a sense of humility, having a listening posture, those are things that chaplains do. And proselytizing is absolutely nothing a chaplain would do. Not in Hospice Austin, not in any place where a chaplain has received some training. Now, surely there's rogue folks out there doing all kinds of things. And I think that you are very smart to be very wise about that. Speaking about spirituality is one of the most intimate things that we can do. And making sure that you are going to be taken care of safely, and that you are going to be listened to and not preached to and not secretly baptized or anything like that. No, that wouldn't be something that I certainly wouldn't do that. I know none of my colleagues would ever do that either. And of all the chaplains that I've worked with in the local area hospitals, that wouldn't be something. And chaplains are very, very happy to not even talk about religion, but to talk about how you are doing. Like, how's your heart? How's your spirit? Those are things that we do. Does that help answer your question? And please feel free, if you ever do decide to do a test run and call a chaplain, you can say, this is me, and I would like you to know this. Is this, can we work together? Yeah, we're great with that. We're really great with that. All right. Hi.
My name's Lynn.
Hi, Lynn.
Thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
And my question is about how to encourage people who have family situations where hospice is a great option, because so many times I see families waiting really late in the process, and when they do, they go, oh my gosh, everything is so much better now, and things from pain management to just the everyday lifestyle that you have, and changing to where you really focus on quality. But what kind of tips can you give me that might help families and people in that situation?
Well, that is a great question. And we have a whole a whole department of Hospice Austin are admissions folks that help do that education about hospice. And we have people that go out and speak in the community all the time. One of the things that I don't know is helpful right now where we are as a society is people do look at hospice care sometimes as a giving up. And when hospice comes in the news, I don't know if y'all remember John McCain's death not too long ago. Just a few days before he died, he's on hospice care. And then I don't want to say that isn't something that's valuable, because hospice is valuable to the people who are loved by the patient. But when we wait and wait for so long, there really is so much good that can come with just the conversations, the support. About 300 or so, more than 300 patients right now receive care through Hospice Austin in their homes. And when folks are receiving care at their home, just like at Christopher House, they have a team that includes a nurse, a doctor that's overseeing the care. They have a certified nursing assistant. That's the person who will come in and give baths and make sure that things are trucking along the way that they should. Just kind of that really, the helper, the helper position that is so valuable. And then everybody has a social worker on their team. And the social worker is an expert at doing things like perhaps the home environment is no longer working as well. Perhaps we need to look into a facility. A social worker also can help with final arrangements. I sometimes help with that too at Christopher House. And then a chaplain, somebody who's kind of your kind of soul partner, talking through some of those bigger issues that come up. I think the reluctance is death. I think that there is so much importance and value placed on youth and health and vitality. And in this country in particular, founded on that independent spirit. Anytime you're asking for help, that seems to be you have lost that sense of independence. And then that may elicit some feelings of weakness. I also find that many people, and understandably so, this isn't casting any judgment on this, many people find value in their ability to do. Having value in just being is another conversation. And when you are no longer able to do the things that you used to do, how do you continue to live as full of a life as you can? Those are big questions, and I think some of the reluctance with looking at hospice care has very much to do with some of those fears. But I don't know that I have the answer. Every single person is going to be different, but one of the things that in the very beginning of hospice that Dame Cicely Sanders, you guys might have heard of her, she had talked about how the goal of hospice is to retain dignity up into the very, very end. And I think that is part of the important conversations that can go on when folks are considering what to do. So thank you. That is a really good question. Really good question.
Hi, my name is Glenn. I'm curious,
Glenn.
You referenced that sometimes family dynamics take over in the hospice, and you have, and certainly I have, not specifically with hospice, but when people are related to someone who's dying, a lot of things really come up that have been pretty much repressed over years. What do you do to try to or any advice or pointers when you have the dynamics now coming up full speed ahead, and you've got the person who is no longer, sometimes was a person who was able to keep things under control, maybe not anymore. Just when you have that situation, what, if anything, Can you tell us about when you've got the family dynamics now really turning bad?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, well, first off, I don't do this work by myself. And I think that it's probably unreasonable to expect that decades and decades and decades of problems can be resolved in the short period of time that that we would be journeying with them in this. But one thing that I do think is very important is to emphasize the present and the moment and mindfulness as to the time and the place that you're in, and that being the focus. Redirecting people to experiences that are centering to them now, ways that they can give some peace to themselves. One thing that we very much encourage, and this comes up quite a bit, is the end-of-life journey can be very stressful, and it can last longer than anybody sometimes would want. So we are big advocates of self-care. I know that sounds very basic, but going for a walk, making sure you're eating, making sure you're getting good rest, all of those things help you, in the process. Now what, Uncle Joe or Aunt Susie decides to do, there's only so much that an individual family member can control. So we help to tap into the resiliencies inside of each individual in that family unit, in so much as they are welcoming of that. Also, I need to point out in this, with Hospice Austin, we have a vibrant and robust bereavement care department that is actually open to the community, not just Hospice Austin patients or their families, but if people in the Austin community are having a really tough time with grief and grieving and need some extra attention and help with that, we have support groups that are many times custom tailored to loss of a parent or loss of a spouse or loss of a sibling. Those are some of the things that we help provide. I would like to say that I just had a magic wand that could make it go away. And I sometimes share that with my patients. There are 14 rooms at Christopher House, and if the house is full, there are things that 14 times a day I wish weren't happening. But 14 times a day I see how light always comes in darkness. And I have grown to trust that happens and that comes and that assistance shows up. I share an office with one of the very best human beings walking the planet. Her name is Gia, and she is beautiful and wonderful, and she's back from Italy, and I'm so happy because I'll get to see her tomorrow. But one of the things that Gia and I always say to ourselves is, trust the process. Trust the process. And that helps us a bit. That helps us a bit.
Hi, my name's Melanie.
Hi, Melanie.
Hi. Both of my parents had hospice care at home before they died, which was wonderful, wonderful experience in Houston. And my question is more about, once the death occurs, whether, it seemed as if in our situation that everything had been planned out. My parents had everything planned out. And it seemed like once each of them died, which they were about 5 years apart, it just went like this. Somebody came, picked my dad up, and so forth. And I'm wondering if that is, I know in some cultures or that people, prepare their loved ones for whatever burial or whatever, bathe them and so forth. And I'm just wondering here in Texas or in the United States, what is actually required? Like, can people take that time to, be with their loved ones for 24 hours? Or that's my question.
Well, you know what? Those are great questions. I want to just preface everything that I'm about to say as I am not a funeral director. I don't know all of the laws and all of the inside outs on that. What I can talk to you about specifically is about Christopher House and what happens there at Christopher House. When a patient dies, oftentimes, if it's while I'm having my business hours, I guess, is what it would be called, 9 to 5 is when I'm there, I almost always go in the room, and one of the things that I always say to remind them is nothing goes fast. Nothing has to go fast. There, at Christopher House in particular, many hours can pass. I mean, after a certain time, 10 hours or so, we need to move things toward final arrangements and having transportation arranged. So, because we're not able to provide that service at Christopher House. But slowing down in that space, I think, gives gifts to a great many people. I know some of my Buddhist patients, they wait 8 hours. They don't want any distractions or anything to disturb the room for 8 hours, because that gives time for the soul to do what the soul must do. I've also lovingly had families bathe their loved ones after death. I've helped take little locks of hair and put them in nice bags so people can have that time. I think that is an absolutely appropriate way of saying goodbye, especially now when so many people opt for cremation. This may be the last time that you are physically with the body of your loved one. I though, am a little hesitant to say that is the right way, because I don't believe that there is a right way. I have worked with families that leave very quickly after, because they had a soft landing place at home, and grieving at home made best sense. Now, as far as some of the laws and technicalities of all of that, I would not be equipped to speak to that. But after this, I can give you a name of somebody who can help answer those questions. Does that get to some of what you were talking about? Yes, thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Hi, my name's Carol.
Hi, Carol.
And I'm wondering if I have two things. One is, I know there's hospice all over the country, but I don't know how it's organized, if it's more like AAA and it's all different, or there's some central thing. And the other is a question about how hospice in Austin utilizes, or if they do, volunteers.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Well, I'll start with the first one. Hospice Austin is a not-for-profit. Not all hospices are not-for-profit. So what that means is that we are not here to make money. Any money that we make gets reinvested into the community and reinvested into Hospice Austin. It doesn't go to shareholders or anything like that. Now, there are for-profit hospices. There's a great many for-profit hospices. And just to, if you do just a Google search, you can find a variety of different providers. Now, are they all organized under some bigger hospice umbrella? No. It would just be like any other healthcare service here in the country. So I feel about 90% sure that what I told you was on target. I'm probably skipping over some nuances because that is not entirely in my wheelhouse of what I do. And do we have volunteers? I want to tell you, we have not only volunteers, but we get the cream of the crop volunteers. And I was so glad to know that you have some experience with volunteering with hospice. We have a pretty thorough vetting process with that. We ask for some letters of recommendation. And we also have a long training process. For volunteers to serve at Christopher House, they need to have been a volunteer for a certain length of time before they have that one-on-one in the inpatient unit that I'm based out of. But yes, we have volunteers, and we have volunteers that have 4 legs and are furry, and they come by and do better spiritual care than I would ever hope to do. We have, at Christopher House, we have volunteers who are massage therapists. We have volunteers who are harpists. We have volunteers who play a variety of different musical instruments. We have Reiki, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, healers that can volunteer. We have hair cutters. We have, you name it. I mean, people are so generous with hospice and Christopher House in particular. And we have folks just like everybody here in this room. We have people who have a heart for caring for others. We also have some really great listeners, people who are good at holding space, people who are good at not saying anything at all, which is some of the best care sometimes that we can have as human beings, just that connection of presence. So yes, the answer is yes. And a lot of times for our home team, well, we call them home team. That just means they're a hospice patient at home. For our home team patients, they can be hooked up like one-on-one with a volunteer who gets involved in, being another level of support in addition to, the nurse, the nursing assistant, the social worker, the chaplain. So, yeah.
I'm Jill.
Hey, Jill.
How do you, in a healthy way, let go of someone who you love but may not like?
That is... I don't know that there's one answer to that question. I think that knowing that you have had a connection with that person that has impacted you in all different ways, and being honest with that. One of the things sometimes people like to do is they like to almost, give sainthood to our dearly departed. That's not always the case, I would hope that if anyone was to eulogize me, they wouldn't just say that, I was sunshine and lollipops all the time, because that's just not true. I think that it is important, though, having a clear-eyed understanding of a relationship. And I think that gives you a little bit more of an ability to pinpoint the things that really have been a blessing. The things that you can hold up as, this was something that helped me. That is such an individualized question, and how to do that. I wish I just had a blanket answer to that. But I do think that sometimes being able to say, yeah, this was a complex person, as am I, that's what helps me. That's what helps me. Another thing that helps me is, I'll tell you. So this month in November, we are going to be honoring the people who have experienced end of life at Christopher House, and I'm helping. I'll show you. I think I even brought one. I think I did. I brought this. We're going to have these doves hanging from our skylight between November now and November of 2017. We've had more than 400 people who have died at Christopher House. So inside the doves, we're writing names of people, and then these will be hanging up there. Having some things to ritualize the experiences of grief and loss have become life-giving for me. My bag is over there, but one of the things that I do after a really hard day, I'm gonna go get it because it's just. I want to show you guys this because Every chaplain has got some different thing that they do to try to care for themselves. I run and run and run. That's one of the ways that I do it. But today there was a race downtown, and I was so glad to participate in it because for an hour and 45 minutes, I had a celebration of body and breath. And I'll tell you, there is nothing more life-giving for me than doing that. I also, after a very hard day, will go home and, I've got all this eucalyptus stuff that I throw a shower bomb in the shower of eucalyptus. I scrub myself with all this eucalyptus stuff and I'm just smelling like the whole entire continent of Australia by the time I'm done. But I also have this. I have this little headband thing that I'll put on. I'll walk around the house in it. And it reminds me that I've done something hard and I've done something beautiful and that it may be sad, and it is. But gosh, I had an opportunity to do that. And I don't mean to use too much like video game analogy, but in some ways, the more you do this work of compassion, you kind of level up every now and again. Just like you would in a video game. You go on to the next thing, and you're able to kind of carry something that you didn't know you could carry before. So I do that. I have this. I wear it. On a really hard day, I have a sweatshirt that says, "Nope, not today." And my son, he's come home and he's seen me in that. He's like, "All right." He just walks off. So some of those self-care things also have been useful.
Well, a moment ago, you mentioned your own eulogy. And that is to say, with your experience of those in hospice and their families, how are you preparing for your own eulogy, and how are you preparing your family for that moment?
Well, wow. My goodness. How do I even begin to answer that? Well, I oftentimes am called to help officiate a memorial service. I like to think that we are each an expression of a love that goes beyond our own understanding, and that we are connected in ways that are mysterious and beautiful and awesome. When I think about my own life now, I am more interested, not in my eulogy, but how my day-to-day is a testimony to life and what that looks like. Now, do I do that perfectly? Do I wake up every morning and take in a big, deep breath and go, "Thank you, God, for another day"? I don't always start my day like that. But I can tell you somewhere along the way, through the work that I do, of seeing people who are, in fact, taking their last breath, that does shape you in ways that make you wake up. There's this beautiful little line from Mary Oliver, Instructions for Living a Life. She says, "Pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it." And I have found that little bit of instruction has grown voluminously since working with folks and families at the end of life. So as far as my own eulogy and as far as what I would like to be remembered as, I can truly tell you that although, I would hope that, there'd be cocktails. I am not as concerned about that as I am for what is each day going to be like. Now, working with families that are in the throes of grief, of course, that's not something that, makes as much sense. But I do encourage them to tell stories. Even if their loved one is asleep and isn't communicative, sharing those stories of life together and holding hands and giving voice to the multifaceted experiences that people have together in the course of a lifetime, that's the good stuff, That's the good stuff. And oftentimes those stories get incorporated into eulogies in funny ways. I'll share you a story, a very quick story, because sometimes, laughter is based on dark humor, and that happens sometimes when you work with people at end of life. And I was working with this one gentleman who was telling me about, before he came to Christopher House, he went shopping at H-E-B with his sister, and his sister picks up some bananas, and he goes, those bananas are green, right? And she said, yeah. He goes, I don't got that kind of time. So those types of stories get shared at eulogies. And I think that they're good because they do speak to the complexity of the individual. And maybe, they were very clear-eyed and found humor in their experience. Yeah.
How do you address your loved ones to let them know that one day you might not be?
Oh, I've told them what I want. I've been absolutely clear. And I want to encourage all of you today that if those conversations have not already happened in your life and within your family, Thanksgiving's coming. And it's a great time to talk about some of these things. In fact, we have a wonderful, wonderful person who I would encourage you for another forum to perhaps bring. Her name is Shirley Price, and she talks about the conversation, and she talks about end-of-life planning. She talks about making sure that your desires are known by family members. So yes, absolutely, I've been very clear on what I would like and what I would not like. And honestly, that is a gift. That is a gift that you give to one another. Some of the most difficult experiences that we have is with families struggling, wondering if they're doing the right thing, wondering if they're doing right by their loved one because they've never talked about this. Or it's been pushed and pushed and pushed into the background and under the rug for so long that it's just, it's like the thing that you don't see. It's this denial of death that we do very well, actually, as a society, and perfect sometimes within our own families. But yes, I talk about that. Tomas.
Diana, thank you for what you all do. And I'm confused. The state of Texas, with a woman that is pregnant, has outlawed having end-of-life hospice care, as far as I understand. Has any of your staff dealt with that? Has that changed? What do you all do if somebody comes and their spouse is pregnant and they want help in figuring out what to do because the state apparently makes it against the law for a pregnant woman to have an option of end of life, even if, or especially if they are unconscious, and that's been the case for quite some time. The young lady in California in Florida comes to mind.
Yeah. Well, I want to tell you that we have a very robust ethics committee with Hospice Austin, and I think most hospice care providers do also as well. Some of those questions go beyond what I do alone. What I do in complex cases is simply hold space. I don't get involved with some of the legal issues. Those are things that other folks within our organization would be involved with. I do, though. One of the hardest prayers at first when I started this work was people asking me to be with them in prayer because they wanted to pray for the death of their loved one. I don't have such a hard time with those prayers anymore. Sometimes people have said to me that we treat pets and animals better than we do human beings. I will let that just be. But thank you for the question. I do want to, I do want to affirm that we do have a very robust ethics committee that looks at those cases very closely, and they're followed very carefully and compassionately. So, yeah.
All right, we have time for one last question.
Okay.
Actually, it isn't a question, it's more a plea. How important it is to make your wishes known in writing.
Yes.
And a last, what you want done at the end, a living will.
Yes.
Is so incredibly important, and it's a great relief to your family who then doesn't have to make those decisions, especially if they disagree.
Yes.
And so a living will in writing and your wishes in writing, because at the Thanksgiving table, there are going to be lots of interpretations.
That is very true. And one thing, too, just as a basic, is if you don't have a medical power of attorney, think about who you might want to have as the person who's making decisions for you in the event that you aren't able to make those decisions for yourself. That is very important. You can also have some advanced directives that outline different things that you want or don't want. But if you have someone you can trust as your medical power of attorney, that gives you peace of mind, and it helps with the entire family situation and friend situation. So maybe that might be a Christmas present to yourself. Find an MPOA and make that designation. There are forms that you can find online, very easy, and those are things that Shirley and some of the folks that we have that come out and speak to groups help encourage. So.
Thank you very much for coming out today.
You're welcome.
We really appreciate you. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I think you said you can stick around for a little bit afterward if there's anything else that folks would like to talk with you about. I know I'm one of those. So.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you. And I do want to encourage you all to take a look at our website, because there's lots of different resources there. It's hospiceaustin.org. And again, I want to just make sure that I've said this clearly. I am not on the ethics committee. I'm not a funeral director. And I hope I've been really clear in the things that I am able to talk about with authority and things that I am not so much. So if some of the questions, if I wasn't able to answer those and you are curious, let me know and I can help you find the person who can most adequately answer them. So thank you.